Imagine a country facing not one, but two of the world's largest crises. The biggest internal displacement and the biggest hunger crisis, all in the same place.
Wow.
And yet,
Yeah.
it's barely a blip on the radar.
Right.
That's Sudan in 2025.
It's a tragedy
It is.
of immense proportions.
Yeah,
And sadly, one that often gets lost in the constant churn of global news.
exactly. It's like this perfect storm of conflict and climate change
Yeah.
and political instability just hitting all at once.
Uh-huh.
So today we're taking a deep dive into Sudan,
Okay.
and we're going to be guided by this fascinating NPR Throughline episode
Sounds good.
that really helps to connect the dots.
Yeah.
And believe me, the connections are mind-blowing.
I bet.
We're talking camel raiders turned warlords,
Oh, wow.
oil wealth that ignited more problems than it solved,
Uh-huh.
and this cycle of revolutions and coups that just seem
Yeah.
ripped from a history book.
It's a complex story for sure, but it's one that we need to understand. Because what happens in Sudan has ripple effects far beyond its borders.
I agree.
Think international trade routes,
Yeah.
energy supplies,
Uh-huh.
even the fight against terrorism.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And to grasp what's happening today,
Yeah.
I think we need to rewind a bit.
Okay.
Because Sudan has a history
Yeah.
that's just steeped in power struggles.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like a pendulum,
Okay.
swinging back and forth
Oh, yeah.
between civilian rule and military takeovers.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to understand this pendulum,
Yeah.
I think we need to go all the way back to the 19th century
Okay.
to the Mahdi's uprising.
Okay.
Imagine this charismatic religious leader
Mm-hmm.
uniting the Sudanese people against British Egyptian rule
Wow.
and establishing an independent Islamic state.
Okay.
This moment, while fleeting,
Yeah.
left an indelible mark on Sudan's identity,
Okay.
this yearning for self-determination that just echoes through the decades.
It's incredible
Yeah.
how events from so long ago
Yeah,
can still shape a nation's trajectory.
it really is.
But that desire for self-rule
Yeah.
didn't translate into lasting stability.
Yeah.
And then enter Omar al-Bashir,
Right.
who held power for 30 years,
Right.
a reign that was marked by
Yeah.
brutality and division.
Al-Bashir was a master manipulator.
Yeah.
He exploited these existing ethnic and religious fault lines, pitting groups against each other to consolidate his own power.
Right.
And let's not forget, he was ultimately indicted
Yeah.
by the International Criminal Court for Genocide in Darfur.
Right.
His regime was undeniably ruthless.
It's chilling how one person
Right.
can inflict so much suffering.
Right.
But during Bashir's reign,
Yeah.
there was another element
Mhm.
that added fuel to the fire: oil.
Yes. The discovery of oil in the late 1990s should have been a blessing for Sudan,
Right.
but it turned out to be a classic case of the resource curse.
Right.
Instead of lifting everyone up, the oil wealth
Yeah.
primarily benefited the elite, deepening these inequalities,
Yeah.
fueling corruption.
Of course.
It's almost like pouring gasoline on an already smoldering fire.
And this brings us to one of the most intriguing figures in this story.
Okay.
A man who embodies the turbulent nature of Sudanese politics. Hemedi.
Okay.
This is the guy who went from camel raider
Wow.
to one of the most powerful warlords in the country.
That's incredible.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is.
It's a truly remarkable rise to power.
Yeah, Hemedi, whose real name is Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo,
Okay.
started as a leader of the Janjaweed militia,
Well,
a group infamous for its role in the Darfur genocide.
right.
But Hemedi was savvy.
Great.
He realized that controlling valuable resources,
Uh-huh.
particularly gold mines,
Yeah.
was the key to amassing power and influence.
So we have this complex web
Yeah.
of historical grievances.
Right.
A dictator clinging to power. Oil money exacerbating inequalities.
Right.
And this ruthless militia leader rising through the ranks.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, a glimmer of hope. Bashir is finally overthrown in a popular uprising.
Oh, wow.
Was there a genuine sense of optimism at that point?
Absolutely. It felt like a new chapter for Sudan.
Yeah.
People from all walks of life came together demanding change, envisioning a future
Yeah.
free from oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, there was even this fragile partnership between the military and civilian groups,
Yeah.
a shared goal of transitioning to a democratic system.
But that hope was tragically shattered.
Oh, no.
On June 3, 2019, with the Khartoum massacre.
Wow.
Can you tell us about what happened?
It was a horrific turning point. Thousands of peaceful protesters had gathered in Khartoum demanding civilian rule.
Right.
The RSF, under Hamedi's command, were supposed to be providing security, but instead they opened fire on the crowd.
Oh, wow.
Killing over 100 people and injuring countless others.
So the very forces that were supposed to be protecting the people turned on them?
Yeah.
That must have been devastating.
It was a brutal crackdown.
Yeah.
That exposed the military's true intentions.
Right.
And the fragility of that transition process. The dream of a peaceful democratic Sudan was shattered, leaving the country more vulnerable than ever.
And this ultimately leads us to the current conflict.
Right.
Which, as you said earlier, is far more than just a civil war.
Exactly. It's a multi-layered struggle with internal power struggles, regional rivalries, and these global players all vying for influence.
Right.
On one level, you have Hamedi's RSF battling the Sudanese armed forces, now led by General Burhan, who was initially part of the transitional government alongside Hamedi.
Right.
They're fighting for control of Sudan's resources, with gold being a key prize.
So it's a power grab with extremely high stakes.
Yes, but it's made even more complicated by the involvement of external actors. Well, Russia, for instance, is playing the cynical game by supplying arms to both sides.
Wait, Russia is arming both sides?
Yeah.
What do they gain from that?
Chaos and influence. By fueling the conflict, Russia maintains leverage in this strategically important region. They can exploit the instability to gain access to resources, particularly gold, which they desperately need after sanctions imposed due to the Ukraine war. It's a way to prop up their currency and undermine Western influence in the region.
And this is where the Wagner Group comes in, right?
Exactly.
That notorious Russian mercenary force we've been hearing so much about.
Yeah, the Wagner Group has been heavily involved in Sudan's gold trade, providing support to Hamedi and the RSF. They extract vast amounts of gold, which is then funneled back to Russia, helping them evade sanctions and bolster their war chest.
It's incredible how interconnected this all is. It's not just about Sudan, it's about global power plays and this cynical manipulation of a vulnerable nation.
You hit the nail on the head. And while these geopolitical chess games are being played, it's the Sudanese people who are paying the price.
Of course.
The humanitarian crisis is catastrophic. Millions have been displaced from their homes. Food and medical supplies are scarce. And the violence continues unabated. It's a tragedy on a massive scale.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really is.
So we have this volatile mix of internal power struggles, a legacy of historical grievances, the curse of resource wealth. And external actors like Russia stirring the pot for their own gain.
It's a mess.
It is.
But let's shift focus for a moment and talk about how this conflict actually erupted. What was the final straw that tipped Sudan into all-out war?
What was it?
The final straw, the trigger that set off the current explosion, was the planned integration of the RSF into the regular army. Hamedi, unsurprisingly, wanted a longer timeline for this integration, while Burhan, the head of the army, wanted it done much faster. It became a major point of contention.
But why was this integration such a big deal?
Control. Pure and simple. Both Hamedi and Burhan saw this integration as a threat to their respective power bases. Hamedi had meticulously built the RSF as this independent force, loyal to him personally. Folding them into the regular army would diminish his control, potentially leaving him vulnerable.
So it wasn't really about military reform. It was about who would hold the reins of power.
Exactly. Burhan, on the other hand, saw the RSF as this rogue element, a potential threat to his authority and the stability of Sudan. He wanted them under his direct command, believing this was the only way to ensure a unified military force.
And neither was willing to back down.
No. The tension had been simmering for months, with both sides maneuvering for advantage, consolidating their positions. And by April 2023, it reached a boiling point. Clashes erupted between the RSF and the army in Khartoum. And within days, it escalated into full-blown war.
And as we've seen in those horrific images from Sudan,
I know.
This war has been incredibly brutal.
It's awful.
Street battles, airstrikes, Desperate civilians fleeing their homes.
It's a nightmare scenario.
It is.
It's a humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah.
Hospitals have been bombed.
Oh, God.
Aid workers targeted.
Jeez.
And countless innocent people caught in the crossfire.
Right.
The situation is spiraling out of control.
And as you can imagine, this conflict has been particularly horrific for women and children.
Yeah.
The most vulnerable in any war zone.
Of course.
We've heard reports of widespread sexual violence,
It's
forced disappearances, children being recruited into armed groups.
Yeah.
It's almost too much to bear.
It's a tragic reality of conflict.
It is.
Women and children often become the primary targets.
Yeah.
The victims of this horrific violence aimed at breaking the will of communities,
Right.
sowing terror and asserting dominance.
Yeah.
It's a tactic as old as warfare itself.
It is.
And it's absolutely abhorrent.
Okay, so we have this intricate web of internal power struggles,
Right.
the meddling of external powers,
Mm-hmm.
and this humanitarian crisis of unimaginable scale.
It's really bad.
It is. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible resilience
Yeah.
of the Sudanese people.
Absolutely.
How are they coping amidst this nightmare?
Their strength and resilience are truly remarkable.
Yeah.
Despite facing unimaginable hardship, they're finding ways to survive, support each other, and even resist the violence.
Can you give us some examples of what you're hearing from people on the ground?
Sure.
What are they doing to cope?
There have been these incredible acts of courage and compassion.
Like what?
Neighbors sharing what little food they have,
Very
doctors and nurses risking their lives to treat the wounded, community leaders organizing efforts to help those displaced by the fighting.
Wow.
It's truly inspiring.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Mm-hmm.
the human spirit can shine through.
Absolutely.
But it's also incredibly sad that they have to endure this in the first place.
I agree. Their lives have been turned upside down.
Yeah.
Their dreams shattered.
Uh-huh.
Many had lost loved ones, their homes, their livelihoods.
Right.
They're living in constant fear and uncertainty.
And with the rainy season upon us,
Right.
things are likely to get even worse.
Unfortunately, you're right. The rains will make it even harder to deliver aid,
Yeah.
access healthcare, and escape the fighting.
Yeah.
The risk of disease outbreaks
Right.
and further displacement is very high.
This is a heartbreaking situation.
Yeah.
And as we've seen,
Yeah.
this conflict has deep roots.
Uh-huh.
There are no easy answers.
No.
But we have to try to understand it to shed light on the suffering and to explore potential paths forward.
I completely agree. Understanding the complexities of this crisis is crucial if we want to help in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll do in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at the international community's response, analyze the prospects for peace,
Okay.
and discuss what we as individuals can do to make a difference.
That's coming up in part 2.
Stay with us. As we delve deeper into the Sudan crisis, I think it's important to shift our focus to the international community.
Right.
After all, Sudan sits at this strategic crossroads,
Right.
both geographically and in terms of resources.
Uh-huh.
So the question is, has the world stepped up to help?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen how internal power struggles and the meddling of these external actors
Right.
have fueled this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those who claim to be champions of peace
Yeah.
and human rights?
Right.
What are they doing to stop the bloodshed
Mm-hmm.
and alleviate the suffering?
Unfortunately, the international response has been a mixed bag at best. Yeah.
There have been attempts to broker ceasefires and provide humanitarian assistance,
Right.
but they've been largely ineffective.
Okay.
The situation on the ground continues to deteriorate.
So why is that?
Well,
What are the main obstacles preventing a more robust and effective international response?
there are several factors at play.
Okay.
First, you have the competing interests of regional and global powers.
Okay.
Some countries prioritize stability above all else, even if it means turning a blind eye to human rights abuses.
Hmm.
They see Sudan through the lens of realpolitik,
Okay.
this strategic chessboard where their own interests take precedence.
So it's like this geopolitical tug of war with Sudan caught in the middle.
And that makes it incredibly difficult to reach a consensus on how to address the conflict.
Right.
Each player has its own agenda,
Of course.
its own calculations of risk and reward.
And on top of that,
Yeah.
you have this issue of distrust.
Right.
Both sides in the conflict have repeatedly violated ceasefires.
Shown little regard for international law and use these brutal tactics against civilians.
It's true. It's incredibly challenging to negotiate with parties who seem to prioritize power and control over the well-being of their own people.
Right.
When agreements are broken, when atrocities continue unabated, it just erodes the trust needed for any meaningful diplomatic process.
And then there's the challenge of physically getting aid to those in need.
Right.
We've heard reports of aid convoys being blocked.
Yeah.
Warehouses looted, humanitarian workers targeted.
It's a logistical nightmare.
It is.
The fighting has made it incredibly dangerous and logistically difficult to deliver aid to those who need it most.
Of course.
And when aid does get through, it's often not enough to meet the overwhelming needs.
Right.
We're talking about millions of people facing starvation,
Yeah.
healthcare systems on the verge of collapse, the constant threat of disease outbreaks.
It's a dire situation, and the international community's response so far has been inadequate, to say the least.
It really has.
But I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about something you mentioned earlier.
Right.
The resilience of the Sudanese people.
Yeah.
Amidst all this chaos and suffering.
Right.
Are there signs of hope?
Absolutely. The Sudanese people have not given up.
Yeah.
They are not passive victims in this tragedy.
Okay.
They are actively resisting the violence, supporting each other, and working to create a better future for themselves and their children.
So can you give us some examples of what this resistance looks like?
Sure.
What are people doing to push back against these forces tearing their country apart?
Well, one inspiring example is the emergence of resistance committees across Sudan.
Okay.
These are grassroots organizations, often formed at the neighborhood level, that are stepping in to fill the void left by this collapsing state.
Wow.
They're providing essential services,
Okay.
documenting human rights abuses, keeping the spirit of the 2019 revolution alive. Wow. They represent the best of Sudanese society.
Yeah.
Their determination, their resourcefulness, their unwavering belief in a better tomorrow.
These resistance committees sound incredible.
They are.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
Yeah.
The ability to find strength and unity,
Right.
even in the face of unimaginable adversity. But I'm also thinking about our listeners, many of whom are probably wondering what they can do to help. It can feel overwhelming when you're looking at a crisis of this magnitude so far away.
It's easy to feel powerless, but I assure you, every little bit helps.
Okay.
One of the most direct ways to make a difference is to donate to reputable aid organizations working on the ground in Sudan.
Yeah.
They are providing food, shelter, medical care, and other essential support to those who have lost everything.
And we'll be sure to provide links to some of those organizations in our show notes for anyone who wants to contribute. But what about beyond donations? Are there other ways to make a difference?
Sure.
To amplify the voices of the Sudanese people and ensure that this crisis doesn't fade from the world's attention?
Absolutely. Raising awareness is crucial.
Correct.
Talk to your friends and family about what's happening in Sudan. Share information on social media, but be sure to rely on credible sources. And fact-checked information.
Of course.
Contact your elected officials and urge them to take action.
Okay.
To prioritize diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and accountability for those responsible for the violence.
So it's about using our voices, our platforms, our connections, to shine a light on this crisis.
Exactly.
And to keep the pressure on those in power to find a solution.
And don't underestimate the power of individual action. When enough people speak out, when enough people demand change, it can shift the political landscape. It can force those in power to listen.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of international intervention. This inspiring resilience of the Sudanese people. And the ways in which we as individuals can help. But I want to ask you a tough question.
Okay.
Is there any real hope for peace in Sudan? Is there a path forward that leads to stability, justice, and a brighter future for the Sudanese people?
It's a difficult question, and I don't have any easy answers.
Okay.
The situation is incredibly complex, with deep-rooted historical grievances, competing power structures, and the meddling of these external actors. But I refuse to give up hope.
Okay.
I have to believe that peace is possible, even in the darkest of times.
What makes you hold on to that hope? What gives you reason to believe that Sudan can break free from this cycle of violence and instability?
The Sudanese people themselves. Their history is filled with examples of resilience, resistance, and this deep-seated desire for freedom and self-determination.
Right.
They toppled a dictator in 2019, remember? They have a long history of fighting for their rights and demanding change.
Right.
And there are many brave individuals and organizations working tirelessly for peace, justice, and democracy.
So you're saying that even amidst all the chaos and bloodshed, there's still this flicker of hope, a belief that a better future is possible.
Absolutely. And that flicker can grow into a flame if we all do our part to fan it.
Right.
If we support the Sudanese people in their struggle.
Yeah.
If we hold those in power accountable. If we refuse to let Sudan fade from the world's attention, then yes, I believe there is reason to hope.
I love that analogy of the flicker of hope becoming a flame. But realistically, what would a peaceful solution in Sudan even look like? What are the key ingredients needed to break this cycle of violence and build a more just and equitable society?
It would require a fundamental shift in the power dynamics.
Right.
It would mean holding those responsible for the violence accountable.
Right.
Dismantling the structures of impunity that have allowed this conflict to fester. Creating this more inclusive political system that represents the interests of all Sudanese people, not just the elites or the powerful.
That sounds like a tall order.
It is.
Especially in a country with such a fractured political landscape.
Yeah.
And this history of deep divisions.
It will require sustained effort, dialogue, compromise, and a genuine commitment to peace from all sides.
Right.
It will require the international community to move beyond this empty rhetoric and take concrete actions to support Sudanese-led initiatives for peace and reconciliation.
So it's about empowering the Sudanese people to find their own solutions.
Exactly.
To chart their own course toward the more peaceful and prosperous future, rather than imposing external solutions that may not address the root causes of the conflict.
The Sudanese people know their country best. They understand the complexities of the conflict and what's needed to build a lasting peace.
Okay, so we've explored the complexities of the international response. This inspiring resilience of the Sudanese people. And the potential paths towards a more peaceful future. But I still have one nagging question. Why isn't this crisis getting more attention? Why aren't we seeing the same level of outrage and mobilization as we've seen for other conflicts around the world?
That's a question that deserves more attention itself. There are likely several factors at play. Well, media coverage of Sudan has been sporadic and often overshadowed by other global events. There's also a sense of fatigue, perhaps, after years of witnessing conflict and suffering in different parts of the world.
And maybe a lack of understanding.
The
situation in Sudan is so complex and multi-layered.
It is.
That it can be difficult to grasp, to connect with, on an emotional level.
That's true, but that's all the more reason to keep talking about it. Keep shining a light on this crisis. And to keep demanding action. We can't allow Sudan to become just another forgotten tragedy.
I agree. We have this responsibility to bear witness. To amplify the voices of the Sudanese people. And to push for a more just and peaceful world. But how do we do that effectively? How do we cut through the noise, the information overload, and ensure that the story of Sudan is heard?
It starts with you, the listener. To becoming an informed consumer of information. Go beyond the headlines. Seek out diverse sources. Read articles from Sudanese journalists. Listen to podcasts like this one that go deeper. Engage with Sudanese voices on social media. Don't let yourself get stuck in a single narrative.
So it's about taking ownership of our information intake, being critical thinkers, and seeking out multiple perspectives.
Exactly.
But what about moving beyond awareness to action? We talked about donating to aid organizations. But are there other tangible ways to help the people of Sudan?
There are, and they're incredibly important. Well, supporting organizations that focus on peace building and human rights in Sudan is crucial. These groups are working on the ground to address the root causes of conflict, promote dialogue, and protect vulnerable communities. They're the boots on the ground, so to speak.
And these organizations, as you can imagine, rely heavily on international support to continue their vital work.
Absolutely. Even small donations can have this ripple effect, helping to fund crucial programs and initiatives.
Okay, we've also talked about the importance of raising awareness. But how do we do that effectively? It's easy to feel like our voices get lost in this echo chamber of social media.
Right.
Especially with a crisis that feels so far away.
You're right. It's not just about shouting into the void. It's about being strategic and persistent.
Okay.
Sharing verified information from credible sources is key. Engage in respectful dialogue.
Yeah.
Challenge misinformation when you see it, and most importantly, amplify the voices of Sudanese activists and organizations.
Okay.
Let them lead the way and use your platform to support their efforts.
So it's about being allies, not saviors.
Exactly.
It's about working in solidarity with the Sudanese people, recognizing their agency and supporting their efforts.
Right.
To build a better future for themselves.
Precisely. And that requires humility and a willingness to listen and learn.
Okay, so we've discussed the importance of informed action and meaningful solidarity. But I'm curious, on a personal level, what gives you hope for Sudan? Amidst all this darkness, where do you see light? What keeps you going?
Honestly, it's the resilience of the Sudanese people themselves. Despite years of conflict, hardship, and broken promises, they haven't given up on their dreams of peace, justice, and democracy.
Wow.
They continue to organize, resist, and imagine a better future.
And they're doing this under unimaginable circumstances.
They are.
Facing incredible odds.
Yes, the challenges are immense, but their spirit remains unbroken. And that, to me, is a powerful source of hope. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit can endure, adapt, and find ways to create light in the darkness.
It's a powerful testament to the human capacity for hope and resilience.
It really is.
And I think it's a message that we all need to hear.
Yeah.
Especially in times like these.
Right.
When it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the darkness in the world.
Absolutely. And it's our responsibility to support the Sudanese people in their struggle.
I agree.
We cannot afford to turn away, to become complacent, to let Sudan become just another forgotten tragedy.
Well said.
Yeah.
This has been a heavy but necessary conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have as well.
I hope so, too. It's crucial that we keep talking about Sudan, keep learning, and keep taking action.
Right.
The Sudanese people deserve our attention, our support, and our solidarity.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this complex crisis. And more importantly, inspired you to get involved.
I hope so.
Remember, even small actions, when multiplied by many, can make a difference.
Never underestimate the power of your voice, your actions, your willingness to stand with those who are fighting for a better future.
I'm eager to continue this conversation and explore those solutions.
Me too. This is a story that demands our attention and our action.
Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore how we can all be a part of the solution. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's been a heavy journey as we've untangled the threads of the Sudan crisis.
Indeed, we've explored the historical roots, the internal power struggles, the global players, and the immense human cost.
And in this final part, I'm struck by something you said earlier, that Sudan often feels forgotten by the world. Why is that? What makes this crisis slip under the radar when others capture the headlines?
I think it's partly due to how the story is told, or rather not told.
Right.
Media coverage has been sporadic, focusing on the immediate violence without connecting it to the deeper historical and political context.
Right.
Imagine trying to solve a puzzle by only looking at a few scattered pieces.
You're right. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the images of conflict.
Yeah.
But much harder to stick with a story that feels far away and incredibly complex.
Right.
Like our brains seek out simpler narratives.
Exactly. And that's where, unfortunately, biases can creep in. We've seen this time and again with other conflicts where certain regions or groups receive more sympathy or attention than others.
Of course.
It's a sad reality.
So how do we combat that?
Well,
how do we ensure that the story of Sudan is told accurately with the nuance and depth it deserves?
Yeah.
How do we make it resonate with people who might otherwise just switch channels?
It starts with you, the listener, becoming an informed consumer of information.
Okay.
Go beyond the headlines.
Yeah.
Seek out diverse sources.
Okay.
Read articles from Sudanese journalists.
Okay.
Listen to podcasts like this one that go deeper. Right. Engage with Sudanese voices on social media. Don't let yourself get stuck in a single narrative.
So it's about taking ownership of our information intake.
Right.
Being critical thinkers.
Yeah.
And seeking out multiple perspectives.
Exactly.
But what about moving beyond awareness to action?
Yeah.
We talked about donating to aid organizations.
Right.
But are there other tangible ways to help the people of Sudan?
There are, and they're incredibly important.
Like what?
Supporting organizations that focus on peace building and human rights in Sudan is crucial.
Okay.
These groups are working on the ground to address the root causes of conflict,
Right.
promote dialogue, and protect vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
They're the boots on the ground, so to speak.
And these organizations, as you can imagine, rely heavily on international support to continue their vital work.
Absolutely. Even small donations can have a ripple effect helping to fund crucial programs and initiatives.
Right. We've also talked about the importance of raising awareness.
Yes.
But how do we do that effectively? It's easy to feel like our voices get lost in the echo chamber of social media, especially with a crisis that feels so far away.
You're right. It's not just about shouting into the void. It's about being strategic and persistent.
Okay.
Sharing verified information from credible sources is key. Engage in respectful dialogue.
Yeah.
Challenge misinformation when you see it.
Okay.
And most importantly, amplify the voices of Sudanese activists and organizations.
Right.
Let them lead the way and use your platform to support their efforts.
So it's about being allies, not saviors.
Exactly.
It's about working in solidarity with the Sudanese people, recognizing their agency, and supporting their efforts to build a better future for themselves.
Precisely. And that requires humility and a willingness to listen and learn.
Okay. So we've discussed the importance of informed action and meaningful solidarity.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, on a personal level, what gives you hope for Sudan? Amidst all this darkness, where do you see light? What keeps you going?
Honestly, it's the resilience of the Sudanese people themselves. Despite years of conflict, hardship, and broken promises, they haven't given up on their dreams of peace, justice, and democracy. They continue to organize, resist, and imagine a better future.
And they're doing this under unimaginable circumstances.
They are.
Facing incredible odds.
Yes. The challenges are immense,
but
their spirit remains unbroken. And that, to me, is a powerful source of hope. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit can endure, adapt, and find ways to create light in the darkness.
It's a powerful testament to the human capacity for hope and resilience.
It really is.
And I think it's a message that we all need to hear, especially in times like these when it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the darkness in the world.
Absolutely. And it's our responsibility to support the Sudanese people in their struggle. We cannot afford to turn away, to become complacent, to let Sudan become just another forgotten tragedy.
Well said. This has been a heavy but necessary conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. It's crucial that we keep talking about Sudan, keep learning, and keep taking action.
Right.
The Sudanese people deserve our attention, our support, and our solidarity.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this complex crisis.
Yeah.
And more importantly, inspired you to get involved. Remember, even small actions, when multiplied by many, can make a difference.
Never underestimate the power of your voice, your actions, your willingness to stand with those who are fighting for a better future.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.